All right, welcome into a post-Super Bowl edition of the News4JAGs podcast. I'm Jamal St here alongside Justin Barney. NFL season officially over. I'm going to go cry quietly in the corner because we don't have football for a long time.
Man, and the Chiefs, again, standing there at the end. Remind me of the Patriots. I mean, what they've done, been able to do and navigate free agency and this era of the Super Bowl era. I mean, it's been Chiefs, Andy Reid, Patrick
Yes.
Mahomes. It has been remarkable to watch them. And it is like watching the New England Patriots in slow motion again. And Jacksonville knows what it is up against to be able to scale that mountain.
So the Jaguars clearly didn't make it there. They never have. But next year the Super Bowl is in New Orleans, and all 32 teams are back in the running to get there and maybe walk away with a ring and a nice trophy. So we're going to talk today about what the Jaguars could do to make a serious bid at getting to that next Super Bowl in New Orleans next year. Obviously, there's some work that needs to be done. Is it a ton of work? Maybe. But hopefully not too much, right?
Yeah, man. Just when you look at a team like the Chiefs or even the 49ers, we saw them in Jacksonville up close and personal this year. It's amazing how well they draft, how well they develop. You can overcome situations like not having a number one receiver or receivers who drop everything. It's remarkable how good teams are able to do that. And you saw that with New England. You've seen that with Doug Peterson and Nick Foles in Philadelphia when they won it. I mean, just they are able to overcome their circumstances. And I mean, Doug Peterson's Eagles team did that their year. They lose their starting quarterback, Carson Wentz. They use the backup Nick Foles. Super Bowl championship. I mean, the Patriots have, time and again, we saw that with them. And again, the Chiefs. I mean, they lost week one against the Lions. Did not look like a Super Bowl team. Looked like they had lost a step. And then, by the way, here we are in February, and
Fast forward.
Chiefs win a overtime game against the Niners. Great Super Bowl.
Just absolutely wild. So when you look at it, the Jaguars have a little bit of work to get there because these teams are elite. And I mean, they got elite players all over the place. And when you look at the Jags team, like if we start naming the guys that you just feel like are elite that could start on any team in the NFL, you're going to use one hand. And I don't know if you use all your fingers on one hand.
I mean, who are your guys who could start for any team? Josh Allen? Maybe
Josh Allen's probably in there. Ross Mattisic's in there. I think most teams would find a way to play Evan Ingram. Man,
Maybe Christian Kirk. Maybe is kind of a third receiver somewhere.
I think Trayvon Walker would play for every team in this league. I really do. I know he doesn't make the flashy plays all the time, but the dirty work that he does in the run game, he would have a role on every team.
Okay, so that's four right there, and that's probably it.
Yeah.
There's nobody else. Jaguar. I mean, Foyer. Is he? I mean,
He's a
he's
tackling machine, but there's some really good
Yeah.
linebackers. I mean, watching Fred Warner yesterday.
Woo.
Yeah, so
I mean, that San
yeah.
Francisco defense was wicked.
Yes.
Wicked good.
You love the way they fly around. I mean, just full speed, able to make a clean tackle. Just there's so many good things there. So look, the Jaguars have to get more elite guys, and I think part of it they got to get a different mentality.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, watching that game, I don't know how many times I thought to myself, watching that game last night, man, this is what real football looks like. I mean, these teams are elite, and I mean, again, there's 32 teams in the league, and the two of them were unquestionably the best. But I mean, even when you get down to that next rung,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the Ravens were a freaking elite team.
Yep.
Very, very good team.
100%.
But I mean, the 49ers drafted Mr. Irrelevant, Brock Purdy,
Yep.
and he's on the ascension to become, the 2020s version of Tom Brady. And again, the Jags are just kind of, you scratch your head watching teams like we saw in the Super Bowl. You're like, wow, Jacksonville's got a long, long way to go to get to this point.
Well, look, I think there's a couple of things to this. So, part of the problem is that these teams have been in these builds for a while. So, when you look at a guy, just for sake of conversation, Juwan Jennings had a fantastic game for San Francisco.
Mhm.
Threw a touchdown pass, caught a touchdown pass. I covered him when he was at the University of Tennessee. I've been in Jacksonville for 5 years. So, keep in mind, like Jawan Jennings didn't just get to the NFL. This isn't his like first, second year in the league. So like this is a build. It takes time. Jawan Jennings was one of the top receivers for Tennessee while he was there, but he wasn't really fast. He wasn't really tall, wasn't overly big. So he wasn't like highly sought after, but he was gritty. I mean, I was talking yesterday while he was making plays. I was like, oh man, I remember the Hail Mary he caught against Georgia. Josh Dobbs, Jawan Jennings in the end zone. People were losing it because that was the walk-off touchdown to win the game. And that's Jawan Jennings. And he's making these plays. And I'm like, man. But he's been in the league for 4 or 5 years now. So he's on a second contract with this team. We drafted a guy. We like what he brings to the team. Hey, if what other team sees your value, we'll keep you.
And Jawan Jennings is not a front line kind of guy.
Right.
These are glue guys that hold that team together.
Exactly. And that's sometimes the difference on these teams. Because remember, like, if you wanted to say who's in the Jawan Jennings almost spot on the Jaguars roster, like right now, look at the Jags receiver core. You don't have anybody on his second contract that's not a high-level contributor, like Zay Jones. He wasn't drafted by the Jags. They brought him in as a free agent. So you're getting to that point when you constantly are turning over coaching staff, constantly changing GMs. You don't get that continuity because you're missing and because they don't like guys. So maybe a Tim Jones could one day be a Jawan Jennings type of player for the Jaguars, but he's got to get to that point. He's got to keep improving, and he has to stick around. I think his contract's coming up now, but they'd have to make the decision to keep him.
Yeah.
And you can go the same way on anything. These are teams that have been in this build for a while. Their front office staff has been together. Kyle Shanahan didn't just get to San Francisco. Neither did Andy Reid in Kansas City. Neither did John Harbaugh in Baltimore. The closest thing that the Jaguars have is you look at what Dan Campbell and the Lions have done because they've been on similar paths. And
I've said it on social media throughout the season. The Lions this year are what I expected the Jaguars to be. I expected that growth from Trevor. I expected that leap from Trayvon, and they just weren't there.
Well, all right, so let's talk about I guess we're going to transition this into the Lions conversation a little bit, which is good. I mean, look, I think this is where we're going because I think you're right. The Jaguars are far closer to Detroit, at least in my opinion, than they are to San Francisco or Kansas City. Because San Francisco and Kansas City are in year 7, year 8 of their builds, that they have players on these second and some third contracts where they understand, look, this is what we are. Yep. This is our nucleus, the glue guys that stick for a while. Like DeJuan Smoot's what I would consider a long-term citizen in Jacksonville. I mean, he's made Jacksonville his home. He's a Jaguar and probably would like to finish his career with the Jaguars one day. But how many coaching staffs has he gone through? This is only his second front office because Dave Caldwell was here and then they transitioned straight to Trent Baalke. But, I mean, it's tough when you don't have that continuity because even when you change GMs, they want to bring in their guys because they have a different vision for the team. Trent Baalke clearly had a different vision from Dave Caldwell, and he was just promoted from inside the staff. So, all right, so let's transition to the Lions conversation. So what are the differences you see between the Jaguars and Detroit?
Detroit still got issues, too. I mean, they made it the NFC Championship game with a terrible secondary, a defense that had all kinds of issues, and they were still able to do it. But you got a quarterback you believe in. I mean, Jared Goff was basically given away for a ham sandwich.
Sure.
From, the Rams wanted a franchise quarterback. I mean, Jared Goff was the number 1 pick in the draft. And the Rams said, hey, we don't consider this guy a franchise quarterback. We're going to go get Matt Stafford and do it that way. They basically just gave Jared Goff away, and Matt Stafford was a guy, and Matt Stafford won a Super Bowl, so that was great for them. But, I mean, Jared Goff is a guy who there's chemistry there with his guys. They've drafted well. I mean, Sam Laporta, they've drafted well. They've got hits on the guys. They've done outlandish kind of things. I mean, you're taking Jahmyr Gibbs way early in the draft, right? Yeah. I mean, they've kind of done some stuff that they've hit on, and Jacksonville just has not had that same luck. I mean, I know the Trayvon Aiden Hutchinson comparison has been made, being 1 and 2 in the draft a couple years ago. But I think Detroit has drafted better. I think, I hate to say that Dan Campbell's a better coach than Doug, but he's gotten to an NFC Championship game. I think Doug's probably a better coach. Body of work. Doug's got a Super Bowl to his credit. But Dan, I think, has probably done better in Detroit than Doug has done here. But again, I still think you've got to draft good. And Detroit was able to succeed, excel, despite obvious issues still existing in their roster. I mean, you had issues. I mean, Detroit's defense was just skewered all season long, and still they won 13 games,
Sure.
12, 13 games in the regular season. So you had issues on your roster. You were able to overcome those, and you look at Jacksonville, you have issues on the roster, you can't overcome them, be it the offensive line, be it the defensive lapses and stuff. So for whatever reason, I don't know if coaching, I don't know if it's just got killer instincts on some players, but Detroit has been able to kind of flip the script. I mean, don't even talk about the history of Detroit.
Right.
You know, I mean, the history of Detroit, unbelievably bad. Worse, by far worse than Jacksonville. So for whatever reason, Detroit was able to kind of ride the waves and adjust for its issues, and Jacksonville just has not been able to do it.
All right, so I see where you're going. Here's where I kind of land on the biggest difference between these teams, because I know as you kind of rattled through the weaknesses, the Jaguars have some similar spots, but the one spot that you wouldn't say for the Lions that you'd say immediately for the Jaguars, offensive line. That's it.
Yep.
Look, the Lions invested heavily in building out that offensive line. They put a brick wall in front of Jared Goff in that running game. They invested in it. They drafted for it. They already had a few pieces in place. Some older guys that were already in the building that they wanted to keep. And now that offensive line is really good. One of the best in the NFL. The Jaguars, I mean, all the analytics say the Jaguars are near the worst in the NFL. So, look, just different worlds when it comes to that offensive line spot. And to me, that's the biggest change that the Jaguars need to take from this is, look, you got to fix the O-line, man. I do think there's something to how Dan Campbell's a little bit has a different approach than Doug, which can help. But I think the biggest thing is the offensive line. Look, the difference between Trayvon and Aiden Hutchinson, we can talk about that till we're blue in the face. Look, the stats are close at this point. I know Aiden, makes the splash plays. I know Aiden talks to the media, great interviews. Trayvon's not that guy. He doesn't want to be that guy. It's just different.
It's a negligible difference at this point. Right. I think those guys are similar. Aiden may have more splash plays, quote unquote, may be more highlight friendly, maybe more talkative and more of a sound bite that makes him more, pristine over Trayvon. And plus, I mean, Jacksonville historically has not gotten many benefits of the doubt come that, and it probably hasn't deserved benefit of the doubt. It's how poorly it's drafted in franchise history. But, to your point about building that offensive line, you kind of build from the inside out. I remember growing up as a kid, like, I don't want to draft an offensive lineman. It's just not that sexy pick.
It's not.
When the Jags drafted Tony Baselli, I'm thinking, oh, this is terrible. Why are you going to get an offensive? You see very early in this business and watching football games how important the offensive line is.
Got to win in the trenches.
You got to. And the same for the defense. When Tom Coughlin was here, one of the best back-to-back drafts, he said, I'm going to make this defensive line one of the most feared in the league. You got Marcus Stroud and John Henderson back-to-back drafts and just absolutely fortified that line. Jacksonville needs to do that. They need to build off that Anton Harrison pick. You've got to get some nastiness, be it free agency or the draft, and get a line like Detroit to have a guy like Trevor Lawrence, Jared Goff, both number one picks. Jared was underwhelming in Los Angeles, with the Rams because it just wasn't, they won in spite of Jared Goff. He just didn't have that, that charisma of being that number one pick. He was basically just gift wrapping, giving away. And Trevor's kind of that too. He's not been that kind of that number one guy. A little bit underwhelming when you're looking at 3 years as a whole. So to your point about building that and stocking up, I mean, it's a huge difference because they were able to survive despite pretty glaring weaknesses on their defensive side of the ball.
Look, and there's one of their guys. So this is a little bit of a different episode, but one of the Lions guys, since we're talking about it, has a connection to the Jaguars defensive coordinator, Ryan Nielsen. And I would love for the Jags to add him to Jacksonville because, look, one of the things that you have to be to get to the Super Bowl, to be an elite team, you got to be gritty and nasty, especially on defense.
And by watching that game, the Niners and Chiefs, they looked gritty, nasty, physical. I mean,
That's what they
Nasty.
had.
Nasty.
And I think the Jaguars, like sometimes I looked at it and I said, man, they got a lot of leaders that are lead by example guys. But they need like all those games where they came out flat. You need that. I say this in the NBA. Um, every really good NBA team, they have at least one crazy guy, just the guy that
Yeah.
he doesn't care. He's sliding on the floor. He'll get in the other team's face,
Mhm.
whatever it is, the Patrick Beverleys, the Ron Artests, those really good NBA teams, they got at least one crazy
Yeah.
guy that the other team's just like, I don't know if I want to see that dude in the back alley. Draymond Green's, look, you just don't know what he's going to do. Somebody got a tech, it's probably that guy.
Yeah.
Every good NBA team has one, and most good defenses got one or two guys that you're just like, I don't want to see him in a dark alley. I didn't feel like the Jaguars maybe had enough of those guys that I was just like, I really don't want to see him in a dark alley. So there's a player that played with Ryan Nielsen while he was with New Orleans. He was in Detroit last year.
Okay.
Do you know where I'm going with this?
Oh, man. No, I don't.
Chauncey Gardner-Johnson.
Oh, man.
Yes.
Gator blast from the past.
From the Gators. Look.
Yeah.
Chauncey Gardner-Johnson is the type of player that you don't want playing against him. You love him if he's on your team. You hate him if you have to play against him. Look, he's talks the entire time. Even when the Jaguars had joint practices with the Lions, he was talking trash the entire way. Him and Calvin were going at it on the field, but off the field, they were like, look, we know each other. He's always been talking like that. And they were making a joke about it. But Chauncey's is that right kind of nasty that I feel like he's the kind of guy where I always remember this quote from Cam Newton when he was with the Panthers. He was like, you can't turn a lion into a house pet. And he was like, it's not saying I want to get out of his house. He said, I want to get everybody else on my level. So I'm going to change it to the jungle or to the safari or whatever, however the quote goes. But Chauncey's crazy enough that if everybody else is laid back and flat, it's either going to combust and it's going to be terrible, or everybody else is going to say, man, I got to ramp it up. This dude, look, we're going to ramp it up to this next level and everything's going to be great. There's no in between. Either it's going to be intensity with Chauncey on the team, or it's going to be terrible.
Who is that role now for Jacksonville? Just that crazy Dennis Rodman kind of character where you're like, this dude is
Well,
just...
2 years ago, it was Arden Key.
Oh, yeah.
It was Arden Key, and then you let Arden walk. Again, I'm telling you, every good team's they got to have that crazy guy. You got to have at least one that you just like, I don't know what he's going to do. I mean, but when it's good, like Chauncey on his way out of New Orleans got in a fight with Michael Thomas there. They got a fight in the locker room. That was on his way out. Like I said, when it's great, he's great. He's the type of guy you want on your team, but you don't really want to play against him. And if it's going well, that intensity is perfect. It gets everybody else on that level. But if it's going bad, it's going real bad. And right now, the Jaguars don't really have that. They don't have that sort of personality. I feel like they've gone a different route with the personality types that they've brought in.
Right.
But they don't have that kind of guy, especially not on the defense right now. And that's not, that's not really a shot at guys. It's just saying that's not their personality type.
And I think Jacksonville is kind of, you need that kind of head case a little bit where you don't know the guy is going to be blow up at the Christmas dinner or give somebody a present kind of guy. Jags don't have that guy.
No, they don't.
They don't have that guy, and I totally get it. You walk in the locker room, the guy's making a joke or doing something, kind of can go off the wall a little bit. Just don't have that guy. Don't have him. Trevor on the offense is too vanilla. I'm sure people listen when Trevor speaks, but Trevor's the company line. He's going to give you what you know what you're going to get, but to a Chauncey Gardner-Johnson guy, you don't know what you're going to get. And Jacksonville don't have that.
You need one guy like that who is a leader on the team who can close the door and say, we don't need the coaches for this one. We're going to handle this. And we got to get it fixed. You go through NBA teams all day. Marcus Smart, crazy just like that. Look, you need in the NBA, you really need them. In the NFL, you need it too. Look, if you look on the Chiefs roster, they have those kinds of players. Travis Kelce, in the Super Bowl last night, did you see him explode on Andy Reid? Put his hands on the coach.
Knocked him over.
If that's anybody but Pat Mahomes or Travis Kelce, they're done. So, but you need that kind of guy because at times the NFL is still a job and the season can be long. And just like we saw with the Jaguars, teams can come out flat. It happens. You go to your regular job and you can come in some days and then other days you're kind of like, man.
Let me ask you this. Who do you think was the last kind of alpha like that Jacksonville had. And I'll tell you who I think was after.
Ooh, last guy like
Last
that.
guy like that who carried a little bit of craziness and a little bit of a platform to kind of make it sink in.
I think Arden Key had a little bit of
Okay.
sink into him with the crazy, but not that much. I'd say the last, like, at least since I've been here, the last one I can think is maybe DJ Hayden
Okay.
in 19. Because DJ, when he spoke, people listened. He had a little bit, like, like he wasn't, he'd joke with you. He had a nice go about it. I thought he was a great guy. R.I.P. Was in
Yeah.
that accident.
Sad.
But I think maybe DJ Hayden.
Okay.
That's the last one I can think of.
I'm gonna say Jalen.
Yeah,
I think.
I think Jalen definitely carried a little bit more weight.
Yeah, I
Because
think.
he played at such a high
Yep.
level when he spoke, and he was saying all these things, and that's always been one thing that stuck with me about the way Jalen left. And I know a lot of the fan base kind of turned on Jalen a little bit when he was on the way out the door because he was saying all these things. I
Mhm.
want to play man coverage. I don't think they want to do it here in Jacksonville. They're soft, this, that, and the other. Like, the one thing I always remember is Jalen, when he was demanding his way out, holding the press conference, basically saying, I'm demanding this trade. I think it was like a Tuesday. There were two players standing in that room while he did it. And so he wasn't alone.
Mhm.
The locker room understood what he was saying and didn't think he was wrong.
Yeah.
And one of those players was Miles Jack, who had just signed an extension. So, yeah, I'd say Jalen.
So I do think there's validity to that because I
Yeah.
think as much as Jalen on the outside was perceived to be kind of a prima donna and spoiled brat and all these other insults and stuff, there's the business of football.
Yeah.
But Jalen had enough cachet, he had enough the stones on him to be able to kind of say this, to play that, to be able to have that strong hand,
Yeah.
and it helped too. I think that Calais was in the locker room too.
Sure.
But I think Jalen had the respect. He was that alpha in the locker room. He had a little bit of that crazy side to him, the speak up kind of side, the trash talking kind of side to him, and his play on the field backed it up. And yeah, it was a turbulent exit from Jacksonville, but I think you asked probably 9 out of 10 Jaguars fans, they missed Jalen.
Look, there are different kinds of leadership, and there are times where you need guys that lead by example, and there's nothing wrong with that. Do the job, do it well, hope others follow. But there's also a time where you need a guy who will stand up and says, "Follow me," and that there's a difference between how people approach.
Mhm.
And every person can't just stand up in front of a room and say, "Follow me." Everybody can't do that.
Yep.
You need a guy, it has to be a very particular type. I mean, Chris Jones in Kansas City is a kind of guy who can stand in front of the locker room and say, at halftime, you feel like it's flat, "Follow me. Let's
Mhm.
go. We're going to set this thing off." And everybody listens and say, "All right, here we go." And right now, even in those moments, like Evan Ingram's a quiet kind of leader. He'll speak when he needs to. Christian Kirk, very similar mood, kind of the way he approaches things, it seems like. Trevor Lawrence,
Yeah.
a very similar leadership style. I mean, even Foye Oluokun, very similar leadership style. They have these leaders that are very much, man, I'm going to work hard. I'm going to do what I got to do. People are going to follow me. They'll lead by example. But you need that player that'll stand up sometimes and say, "No, follow me right now. Get on my level.
Mhm.
This is the energy we all need to be on. It's that time."
Yep.
And right now, I don't think they have that in the locker room.
I don't think so either. I mean, you nail on the head. You've got guys, the leaders on the Jaguars, the guys you mentioned, very similar personalities. And you look at Trevor when he was coming out of Clemson, Sports Illustrated did a story on him. It caused an uproar because the author talked about Trevor's personality and his makeup and his psyche, and he just was looked at as kind of this laid back guy. And I think the narrative coming out of that was, does Trevor have that piss and vinegar in him that is going to make him an NFL leader, a quarterback who can kind of emerge through that 3-14 season or 4-13 season? I mean, are you going to be that guy? And I think that was a knock on Trevor. And I think Trevor, his benefactors and his people who were speaking up for him say, "Hey, Trevor's a leader. This guy's a leader." And just because he's not a rah guy, and I've covered
And there's
many
nothing wrong.
athletes in sports like that.
Yeah.
But, if you have a full team of those guys. Some of the guys, you can be that quiet lead by example guy, but some of the
Yes.
times you need that Chauncey Gardner-Johnson who's going to get up in the receiver's face and push him and hit the guy back and get flagged and get thrown out of the game.
You need a little nasty. You need at least one or two guys. I mean, think about the 49ers.
Look at Jalen and was it DeAndre Hopkins?
Jalen.
Got into a flat out just brawl on the field one
Or are
game.
you talking about the AJ Green or the AJ Green?
AJ Green?
AJ Green when
and
he was in Cincinnati, that was the real bad one, I think. There might have been one with, was there one with D-Hop? I don't think there was one with D-Hop. There was another one. There were two fights, though. I know AJ Green.
AJ Green,
was a really bad
again,
one.
But Jalen had just been, in his head all day, and AJ just lost it. And he is a very, very, AJ Green's a Georgia boy, very restrained, very poised, and Jalen just kind of got in his head, and Jags just don't have that guy.
Well, you got to have that intensity level. I mean, look at the 49ers. I'm just Trent Williams. You think he's that? He's got that nasty to him. He'll stand up and talk. Christian McCaffrey, at least the from the outside looking in, seems more of a quiet leader, lead by example kind of guy. But you got a Trent Williams that's already there. Debo Samuel. You see what I'm saying? But Brandon Ayuk, on the other hand, seems more of a lead by example rather than speak up kind of guy. So they have a mixture already there. Brock Purdy comes in as undrafted Mr. Irrelevant. I can guarantee you he's not standing up in front of the room saying much, but he can be lead by example because they have the other voices already in there, and that's just on the offense. If we go through the defense, there are a number of guys. Arik Armstead that can speak up. Fred Warner who's going to speak up.
Right.
They have a number of guys that can say, look, we have a problem. We came in, and we're supposed to be winning this game, and we're losing to whoever it may be. What are we doing? Let's go. And right now, the Jaguars don't have that
identity. They don't have an identity.
They don't have an identity
at all.
And part of that is, like, as much as the coaches can install an identity, and this is the identity of our football team, and this is who we are. The identity is fun. This is at every level of sports, and it's the same reason why if you talk to a coach, they say each team, every new year, your team has a new personality. It's because the personality and the identity of the team is formed by the team, by the locker room, by the players. You can't. Doug Peterson can have a perfect vision of what the identity and personality of a Doug Peterson team is going to be. And there can bits and pieces of that he can try and install. But at the end of the day, it's the locker room that has to execute and has to take on that identity. You can go to Mandarin High School. We can go to Sandalwood. The coach can have a vision for this is the identity of this team. This is what it's going to be. If the locker room ain't that, the identity is what the locker room decided it's going to be.
And, you've got Andy Reid in Kansas City, who's a strong coach. I mean, he's been there for a while. He's got that cachet. He's got the ability to kind of some leeway, the short leash kind of thing or long leash. And he's got guys in there who have been able to kind of come in there and do that. I mean, you saw Kelsey blow up on the sideline.
Right.
And he's got that kind of mojo and be able to go over to his coach and say, hey, I want to be in the game at this time. You don't take me off the field. I need to be in the game at this time. You got Trent Williams.
Now, I'm sure they talked about that afterwards. Well, if they'd have lost, they'd have probably talked more. Win, you probably forget a little bit.
Yeah, but, I mean, you look at, there's no shortage of those guys on San Francisco. I mean, the defense on San Francisco is loaded. I mean, you're talking to Chase Young. You got him at the deadline. Guy's a monster. And, I mean, Bosa in there. I mean, so many guys. Again, drafting well. You infuse the guys onto your team through free agency that come in and fit the mold. And you know what the identities for San Francisco and Kansas City are. If you watch that game, you could see just how physical they were, how precise they were, how nasty they were. And Jacksonville just does not have an identity. I mean, Detroit, look at the identity for Detroit. I mean, unbelievable. That changed the whole city in what they did this year. And you figure, can Jacksonville do that same thing? Can they recapture what they had in 2022? Can they build off of that? And I just don't know what the identity of this team is. You can watch San Francisco and Kansas City play. You know the identities of those teams.
Yes.
You feel that. You see that on the screen. And Jacksonville going in 2024, I don't know what the identity of this team is at all.
When it comes to Trevor and the identity and the fire for this team, every so often you see it. Like, it's like a candle that just won't stay lit. Like, you see something in it, and you'll see him score that touchdown and yell, and he's like there. And even like the play that failed against Tennessee, where he tried to quarterback sneak it and reach it across the line. I have no problem with that. Look, at the end of the day, I am a firm believer that winners want the ball in their hands when the game's on the line. 110%. He said, I want to win this damn game, and I'm going to do what I got to do.
Had Luke Fortner not been on his back watching that play, he would have probably got in.
He might have got in. But so I don't have a problem. Like, to me, that's almost a glimpse of, like, that competitive fire. Like, I'm going to go do this. Yeah. We're going to do this. I mean, and when it backfires, everybody calls it hero ball, right? But when it works, you're like, oh, man, that's the competitive it. That's that, like, Michael Jordan, Kobe Bryant, they wasn't passing the ball for the game-winning shot. Yeah. Same difference.
You look, the last time I saw that from Trevor, Chargers playoff game.
Right. And so it's all, to me, he's almost like a candle that just doesn't stay lit with some of that stuff. Right. And if he can figure out how to get that candle to just stay lit, he could be that guy, that vocal leader that this team needs. And we'll see. Maybe the way last season ended changes some of his outlook or way he approaches things, or maybe Doug Peterson talks to him about what they need from a leadership standpoint from him. Because a lot of times, if your quarterback is the guy, they look to him to be that kind of leader in those tough moments. So if Trevor Lawrence is going to be that guy and going to get that big contract, the Jaguars might need to turn to him in those tough moments for him to be that kind of leader. Overall, we'll see. It's going to be we got a long road until next Super Bowl, but at the very least, the Jaguars are in the running, right? All 32 teams are, so that's not really a big thing. All right, that's pretty much going to do it for us here on this podcast. Our next one, we're going to talk about some tough decisions for the Jaguars roster, players that need to stay and players that we think will go. That'll be coming your way on the next News4JAGs podcast. Hey, thanks for hanging out with us this go around, and we'll see you next time.